By the time most seniors pass away, their children spend nearly 500 hours sorting through belongings. Not treasures, just stuff. Elias Wortham, 72, didn't want that for his family. This is how he cleared his house before 2025 ended, 7 steps you've never tried before. Elias's story isn't unique, but his choice was rare. He had seen what happened when neighbors passed away and their children were left sorting endless boxes in garages and attics, opening closets filled with clothes from 3 decades ago, fighting over furniture no one actually wanted, and paying movers to haul away piles of forgotten things. He didn't want that to be his legacy. Elias wanted his children to inherit memories, not mess. He wanted them to remember the sound of his laughter, not the sight of a storage unit stuffed with regrets. This decision came to him one winter afternoon when he tried to find his old trumpet to play for his grandson. He couldn't even reach it. The case was buried under boxes labeled Someday. That single moment was a wake-up call. Someday never came, and the clutter was choking his present. He realized that every day he waited, the harder the task would become, not just for him, but for the family who would one day have to pick up the pieces. Elias also saw how the weight of clutter damages more than just space, it steals peace. Studies show clutter increases stress, raises anxiety, and even leads to poorer sleep, especially for seniors. He wanted to sleep at night without feeling the heaviness of unfinished clearing pressing down on him. More than that, he wanted his home to feel like a sanctuary again, a place where his children could visit without dread and his grandson could find joy in small corners not blocked by boxes. So, Elias made a promise to himself. Before 2025 ended, he would act. Not with common tricks, not with the same tired advice he had heard before, but with 7 fresh steps that restored his dignity, protected his legacy, and freed his family from future burdens. His journey wasn't just about throwing things out, it was about rewriting the story of his home and deciding what life he would pass forward. Elias, a retired band director from Ohio, had an attic full of trumpets with broken valves, programs from concerts no one remembered, and boxes labeled Someday. But retirement taught him something: someday never comes. He wanted to leave behind love, not laundry lists of chores. So, he made a promise. Before the year ended, he would free his home in 7 powerful ways. For over 40 years, Elias stood in front of bands, guiding students through scales, harmonies, and crescendos. His passion filled classrooms, auditoriums, and parades. But when the baton was set down for the last time, his home began carrying the echoes of that career. Mementos piled into corners, gifts from grateful students, stacks of sheet music, trophies, old uniforms, and instruments beyond repair. At first, he told himself he was keeping memories alive. Yet, as the months turned into years, he realized the memories weren't in the objects at all. They were in the people, the music, the moments that had already taken place. The objects only took up space, both in his home and in his spirit. Everywhere Elias looked, the weight of delay surrounded him. The garage door barely closed because boxes of important things blocked the way. His dining room table had become a storage platform for unopened mail, magazines, and tools meant for repairs he never started. Even his favorite chair lost its place under the clutter of sweaters and books stacked so high that guests had nowhere to sit. Slowly, clutter pushed away joy, comfort, and company. The turning point came when his grandson asked him to play something on the trumpet. Elias went to retrieve it, but the case was buried so deep under stacks of dusty boxes that he gave up. He saw disappointment in his grandson's eyes and felt something he hadn't expected: shame. It wasn't the music that was missing, it was the freedom to share it. That night, Elias sat quietly and admitted to himself, if he didn't act, his legacy would be lost beneath piles of things no one wanted to inherit. He thought of his daughter, who had her own busy life. He imagined her, years from now, sorting through every box, every paper, every broken item. The stress, the arguments, the exhaustion, it wasn't the inheritance he wanted to leave behind. Love shouldn't come wrapped in cardboard and dust. Peace shouldn't be hidden behind clutter. That realization was enough. Elias decided he would no longer wait for someday. He set out to free his house and, more importantly, to free his family from the burden of tomorrow. Before 2025 ended, He would follow 7 powerful steps that would transform his house from a storage of the past into a sanctuary for the present. Step 1. The phone call test. Elias asked himself, would I be proud to tell my children about this item over the phone? If the answer was silence or shame, it had to go. He realized most dusty boxes held no stories worth retelling. The question became his filter, a way to separate treasures from clutter without second-guessing. He imagined calling his daughter, describing each item as if it mattered. If he could explain its meaning in a sentence, why it was valuable, how it told a story, or what memory it carried, then the item deserved a place in his life. If he hesitated, stumbled, or felt embarrassed, then he knew it wasn't worth keeping. It wasn't about stripping his house bare, it was about giving each object the responsibility to speak for itself. Elias started small, with a stack of boxes marked miscellaneous. He picked up an old lamp missing its shade. Could he tell his daughter why it mattered? He tried, but no story came. It had no history, no emotion, no value. He placed it in the discard pile. Next came a faded leather notebook filled with concert notes from the early 80s. As he opened its pages, he recalled the first time his band won a regional competition. He could tell his daughter that story proudly, describing how nervous the students were, how the trumpets nearly cracked on the final note, and how the crowd erupted anyway. That notebook earned its place. The test wasn't just about decluttering, it became a way to connect with his family even while he was alive. Sometimes, when he found an item with a story worth sharing, he didn't keep it hidden. He picked up the phone and told his daughter or grandson right then. He described the meaning behind a photo, the reason he saved a baton, or the memory of a worn concert tie. Those calls sparked laughter, nostalgia, and sometimes tears. The objects that survived the test didn't just stay, they started conversations. What surprised Elias most was how quickly decisions became easier. He no longer agonized over every paper or trinket. The phone call test gave him clarity. Either an item carried a story he would be proud to tell, or it was silent and unnecessary. Slowly, his attic shifted from a graveyard of forgotten things into a curated collection of meaningful keepsakes. He discovered that by using his voice as a guide, he wasn't just saving space, he was building a living archive his family could appreciate now, not after he was gone. By the end of that week, Elias had cleared more than half the attic. What remained no longer felt like clutter, it felt like chosen pieces of his life symphony, notes that still deserve to be heard. Step 2. The empty frame trick. He placed an empty picture frame in his living room. Every week, he chose one memory or photo to fill it. If a keepsake wasn't worthy of the frame, he knew it was clutter, not legacy. By December, his frame displayed only the people and moments that truly mattered. The frame became Elias's mirror, not just of the past but of what he valued in the present. Unlike dusty boxes in the attic, the frame forced him to ask, which memories are strong enough to stand in the open? Which faces, which stories, which moments deserve to be honored? Each Sunday afternoon, he sat quietly in his chair, looking at the frame, asking himself what piece of his life deserved the spotlight for that week. Sometimes it was a black and white photograph of his parents holding him as a baby. Other times, it was a snapshot of his band standing in uniform after a state competition, the trumpet section grinning from ear to ear. But more often than not, the exercise exposed just how many things he had saved that carried no weight at all. He flipped through stacks of pictures where he didn't even remember the names. He uncovered trinkets given out at parades, ticket stubs, and programs from performances that blended together. If he couldn't imagine placing it in that frame, it didn't deserve the space it was taking in his house. The frame also changed how his family interacted with his home. When his daughter visited, she noticed the photo of her mother on their wedding day displayed prominently one week. She stopped and asked about the story behind it, and Elias shared details he had never told before, the way his knees shook, the song that played as she walked down the aisle, the way her smile steadied him. The frame became a storyteller, sparking conversations that brought his family closer. By turning curation into ritual, Elias began to see that legacy isn't about volume, it's about clarity. His frame wasn't filled with everything, it was filled with what mattered most. That simple wooden rectangle gave him permission to elevate the meaningful and release the meaningless. Over time, his shelves emptied, his drawers thinned, and his house slowly transformed from a museum of forgotten objects into a gallery of cherished memories. By December, his frame displayed a series of carefully chosen photos that reflected his truest life, his marriage, his proudest concert, his grandson's first smile. He no longer felt the sting of letting go, because he realized he hadn't lost anything. What mattered most was already framed, visible, and alive. Everything else was clutter pretending to be legacy. Step 3. The visitor's eyes. Elias invited a close friend to walk through his home, pretending they were visiting for the first time. What looked welcoming stayed. What looked like chaos went. Seeing his house through someone else's eyes helped him clear corners he had ignored for years. The idea came to him after realizing how blind he had become to his surroundings. When you live in the same house for decades, clutter begins to disappear into the background. Boxes become part of the wall, stacks of newspapers seem invisible, and crowded shelves blend into the rhythm of daily life. Elias thought everything looked fine until he asked his friend Martin, someone who had known him for years, to take a slow walk through the house as if he were a guest entering for the very first time. Martin's fresh perspective was eye-opening. He pointed out that the entryway table, buried under letters and expired coupons, no longer welcomed anyone inside. The hallway mirror, meant to make the space brighter, was hidden behind a leaning pile of jackets and umbrellas. In the living room, he noticed that every surface was covered: magazines, dusty picture frames, souvenirs that no one had touched in years. What Elias had stopped noticing, Martin saw immediately. The exercise wasn't about judgment but honesty. Elias asked Martin to describe how each room felt. "This corner looks heavy," Martin said of the dining room stacked with boxes. "This chair feels inviting," he added, pointing to one Elias had cleared weeks earlier. That simple feedback gave Elias the courage to release what had lost its purpose. He realized that if a friend saw stress, his children and grandchildren would see even more. Elias began practicing the exercise alone too. He would step outside his house, close the door, and re-enter as though he were a guest. For a moment, he pretended he had never lived there. What would catch his eye first? What would make him smile? What would make him uncomfortable? That shift in perspective turned blind spots into action steps. He no longer asked, "Do I need this?" He asked, "Would this make a visitor feel welcome or weighed down?" Week by week, corners once ignored became priorities. He cleared the entryway so guests could arrive without tripping. He emptied the hallway mirror space so light reflected again. He left one surface in the living room bare, so the space felt calm instead of crowded. Each change, though small, restored warmth to his home. Through the eyes of another, Elias saw his house not as storage but as shelter, not as a museum but as a living place. That perspective allowed him to release clutter without regret, replacing it with an atmosphere of openness. His friend's honesty became the spark, but Elias's willingness to see differently turned his house back into a home. Step 4. The one-box gift rule. Each child and grandchild received one box. Elias asked them to pick anything they truly wanted from his house. What remained afterward wasn't treasure, it was weight. Letting them choose gave him peace and avoided future fights over possessions. This rule was born from a simple truth Elias had witnessed among friends: families often fracture not over wealth but over belongings. He remembered how a neighbor's children argued for months about who should take their mother's china set, while other items ended up in storage units no one visited. Elias didn't want that future for his family. Instead of guessing what his children or grandchildren might want, he gave them the freedom to decide while he was still here to witness it. He bought sturdy boxes and labeled them with each family member's name. When they visited, he explained the rule: take whatever you truly want from this house, but only what fits in this box. Fill it with what speaks to you. At first, they hesitated, unsure of what to choose. Then, as they walked through the rooms, something unexpected happened. His daughter picked the recipe cards written in his late wife's handwriting, not the expensive vase he thought she might want. His son chose the baton Elias had used for years in competitions, a symbol of his father's legacy. His grandson filled his box with old trumpet mouthpieces, saying he wanted to practice on them and carry Grandpa's music forward. The boxes revealed something powerful. What mattered to his family was rarely what he thought. They didn't want the heavy furniture, the extra dishes, or the bulky antiques. They wanted stories, meaning, and personal connection. Watching them fill their boxes gave Elias relief, but also joy. He realized that by letting them choose now, he wasn't just avoiding conflict later, he was giving gifts of love in the present. When the boxes were filled, Elias looked at what remained. Suddenly, the objects left behind didn't feel like treasures anymore. Without emotional ties, they looked like weight he had carried unnecessarily for years. That recognition made it easier to release them. He donated some, recycled others, and discarded what no longer served anyone. The home began to breathe again, lighter with every step. The one-box gift rule also created moments of storytelling. As each person chose, Elias shared the memory tied to the item, passing along the story while he was still alive to tell it. Laughter filled the room as old concert photos resurfaced, and tears came when his daughter clutched a quilt made by her grandmother. These weren't just objects, they became bridges of memory, handed over with intention. By the end, Elias felt a weight lift from his shoulders. What mattered was already in the hands of those he loved, and what remained no longer held power over him. His family left with boxes full of legacy, not clutter. And for Elias, that meant peace, the kind of peace that comes from knowing no one would have to fight, wonder, or suffer under the burden of his belongings once he was gone. Step 5. The Legacy Letter. Elias wrote a short letter to tuck into a folder. These are the 5 items I want remembered after I'm gone. Anything not listed in that letter instantly became negotiable. This turned abstract clutter into concrete choices. The idea came to him after reading about how families often argue not over money, but over sentimental objects left without clear instructions. He had seen it himself, siblings fighting over who would keep an old watch, or grandchildren debating who should take a quilt. Without guidance, those items became symbols of love or favoritism, and instead of unity, they created resentment. Elias wanted no part of that. He believed clarity was the greatest gift he could leave behind, so he sat down with pen and paper and wrote a simple declaration of what mattered most to him. At first, it felt strange to narrow down a lifetime of possessions into just 5 meaningful objects. But as he wrote, the process brought peace. He listed his conductor's baton, the tool that had shaped his identity for decades. He included a wedding photo of himself and his late wife, framed in wood he had carved by hand. He added a quilt stitched by his mother, a symbol of family roots. He chose his Bible, with notes scribbled in the margins from years of teaching and reflection. And finally, he named a single trumpet, the one he had played since college, dented but still capable of holding a tune. These were the things that told his story fully and truthfully. Once the letter was complete, Elias placed it in a folder labeled Legacy. The effect was immediate. Suddenly, the hundreds of other items that had once felt impossible to part with became negotiable. They weren't meaningless, but they no longer held him hostage. If they weren't in the letter, they didn't define him. This distinction made letting go less painful, because he knew what truly carried his essence had already been chosen. The legacy letter also became a conversation starter. When his daughter visited, he showed her the folder. She read the list aloud, her voice breaking at the mention of the wedding photo. Instead of guessing what he valued, she now knew with certainty. That knowledge gave her relief. She wouldn't one day have to stand in a crowded house wondering what mattered most to her father. She already knew, because he had told her. For Elias, the act of writing was as powerful as the decluttering itself. It forced him to reflect, prioritize, and pass along meaning with intentionality. The items not listed no longer weighed heavily on his conscience. They could be released, donated, or discarded without guilt. The 5 chosen items, however, became sacred symbols of his life story, preserved not by accident but by deliberate choice. By turning memories into a letter, Elias transformed confusion into clarity, burden into blessing. His home felt lighter, his heart calmer, and his family more connected. The legacy letter was not just a tool for decluttering, it was a declaration of love, one that would outlive the piles and boxes and give his family peace long after he was gone. Step 6. The December 31st table. He set up a single table in his dining room. Each week, items he wasn't sure about landed there. On December 31st, whatever was left untouched was donated or discarded. His children even joined in the ritual, turning decluttering into family bonding instead of a lonely chore. The table became Elias's compass. Unlike closets and attics, where items hid in shadows for years, the table forced decisions into the open. It stood in a place he couldn't ignore, a daily reminder that every object on it was waiting for a verdict. If an item had true value, it would be taken off the table naturally, used, displayed, or claimed by a family member. If it lingered week after week, untouched and unmissed, then its fate was already sealed. At first, Elias placed small things there, a cracked vase, stacks of old sheet music, a handful of photos without names. But soon, the practice grew into a rhythm. Every Saturday, he carried down a box from the attic or a pile from the garage and spread the contents across the table. His rule was simple: if an item stayed there more than a few weeks without anyone reaching for it, it had no place in his life anymore. What surprised him most was how the table brought his family into the process. When his daughter came over, she'd pause at the table, picking up a book or a framed photo, asking about its story. His grandson loved rifling through the piles, sometimes rescuing a toy or a trumpet mouthpiece, turning them into treasures in his eyes. Decluttering stopped being a lonely task and became a bridge of conversation. The table sparked stories, laughter, and even tears, but most importantly, it turned letting go into something shared rather than endured alone. As December approached, the table grew lighter. More items had either found a rightful place in someone's hands or been marked for release. On December 31st, Elias gathered the remaining things and let them go without regret. The ritual gave him closure, not because he cleared everything perfectly, but because he set a clear boundary. The year could not end with those items still demanding space in his home or in his heart. The December 31st table taught Elias that deadlines create freedom. By giving himself a firm date, he avoided endless hesitation. By sharing the table with his family, he replaced guilt with connection. And by releasing what lingered too long, he reclaimed not just physical space but emotional clarity. The table didn't just help him declutter, it helped him close one chapter with dignity and step into the new year with peace. Step 7. The Future Self Walkthrough. Finally, Elias walked through his home imagining he was 10 years older. Would his 82-year-old self be safe here? Could he move freely? Could his children step in without stress? If the answer was no, the item or obstacle was gone. Decluttering wasn't just about the past anymore, it was about protecting his future independence. This final step was different from all the others because it wasn't about memories, it was about foresight. Elias knew aging brings changes, slower steps, weaker balance, more dependence on clarity and safety. So, one quiet morning, he stood at his front door and pictured himself not as the man he was at 72, but as the man he might be at 82. He imagined holding onto the railing for support, walking carefully through each room, and asking himself whether the space around him was a friend or an enemy. The exercise revealed things he had never noticed before. Rugs he once thought cozy suddenly looked like tripping hazards. Narrow pathways cluttered with side tables and stacks of books became potential obstacles for a man who might one day need a cane or walker. Even the crowded kitchen counters made him realize how difficult it would be to prepare meals if his eyesight dimmed or his hands shook. Each discovery was a wake-up call. The house he lived in today could either protect or endanger his future self. Elias began clearing with new determination. He removed boxes from the hallway to ensure wide, safe paths. He donated furniture that crowded rooms, choosing instead to keep only pieces that provided comfort and function. He stored away fragile keepsakes so his future grandchildren wouldn't accidentally knock them down. Each change wasn't just decluttering, it was an investment in independence. He wanted to stay in his home as long as possible, and that meant shaping it into a place where his older self could live freely and without fear. But the walkthrough also carried emotional weight. Elias thought about his children entering the house if he became ill or passed away. Would they find chaos or calm? Would they feel stress or peace? That perspective pushed him to release items he had once clung to. He didn't want his family to face decisions that he himself could make today. By the time he finished, his home looked different. Simpler, safer, lighter. The floors were open, the walkways clear, the atmosphere calmer. For Elias, the future self-walkthrough was more than decluttering. It was a declaration of self-respect. He was not only honoring the life he had lived but also protecting the years still ahead of him. And as he sat in his newly open living room, he felt a quiet pride. He wasn't just clearing space, he was preparing a future of dignity, freedom, and peace. By New Year's Eve, Elias's house no longer whispered unfinished business. His children no longer feared inheriting stress, his grandson no longer climbed over boxes to visit, and Elias finally slept without the shadow of clutter hanging over his attic. Decluttering before 2025 ends isn't about erasing your life, it's about choosing what life to pass forward. For Elias, the transformation wasn't just physical. It was emotional, almost spiritual. Each item released was more than an object. It was a weight lifted, a silent burden he had carried for far too long. The once crowded attic that had felt like a monument to unfinished tasks now echoed with freedom. The hallways, once narrow and cluttered, became paths of ease, safe and open for family gatherings. The dining room table, once buried under papers and forgotten things, became a place where meals, stories, and laughter could return. His house had stopped being a storage unit and had once again become a home. His children noticed the change immediately. Where once they had worried about the day they'd have to sort through endless boxes, they now felt relief knowing their father had spared them that stress. His daughter thanked him with tears in her eyes, realizing that her inheritance would be stories, memories, and peace, not a to-do list written in dust and cardboard. His grandson no longer had to navigate clutter just to sit by his grandfather's side. Instead, he ran through open spaces, filled the air with laughter, and claimed his favorite chair with pride. For Elias, sleep came easier. No longer did he lie awake, haunted by the thought of leaving behind chaos. He knew he had made choices his family wouldn't have to make. He had taken ownership of his story, deciding what to pass forward and what to release. That clarity gave him dignity, and that dignity became his true legacy. Every empty box was more than just cardboard tossed away, it was proof of courage. Every clear chair was an invitation for connection. Every chosen keepsake was a message to his family. This is what mattered most to me, and I give it to you with love. Decluttering was no longer about loss, it was about preservation. It was about ensuring that when the time came, his home would speak of joy, not burden. Every choice I made this year wasn't about what I gave up, Elias said, but about what I gave forward. Every empty box, every clear chair, every chosen keepsake wasn't just space gained, it was freedom, dignity, and love preserved. If Elias's journey gave you hope, tap like right now. It tells YouTube this message matters. Share this with a friend over 60 who deserves peace, not piles. And subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors, because 2025 should be the year you leave freedom, not clutter, behind.